Here on 2, Arena recalls a life on the radio wave and a pirate bold by the name of Caroline.
Hello.
I think it's an issue that if a program is being made about Radio Caroline, the history of, and its effect, the events of August '89, the invasion by the British and Dutch authorities of Caroline, the smashing of all the equipment, tearing everything out they could tear out, and you know, this whole act cannot be ignored. You can't ignore it.
Tonight, Radio Caroline is silent. The Ross Revenge she broadcasts from, marooned in international waters off Essex, a Dutch tug alongside. There was drama as the Dutch went aboard, but Caroline kept broadcasting.
Right, this could be the end. We wish you a lot of love. We've been here since 1964, Easter Sunday 1964, and hopefully someday Radio Caroline will be back. In fact, I feel sure that we will. Please keep listening.
Loving awareness is free.
Going back in time on the sounds of the nation, it's the Caroline flashback.
On Easter Saturday, March the 28th, Radio Caroline's first broadcast descended on Britain like a bolt from the blue. It had been a well-kept secret. Radio Caroline, 4.5 miles off Felixstowe, was the first of the pirate ships to beam unlicensed pop music over British shores.
We found the men behind this scheme in the office of that glossy magazine, Queen, just around the corner from the law courts. Jocelyn Stevens, editor-in-chief of Queen magazine, is joint managing director. Chris Moore is the program controller of Radio Caroline, and Ian Ross, sales executive. Ronan O'Reilly, the originator of Radio Caroline, begins at the beginning.
Well, I suppose in a way it came out of the 60s rock and roll era, because at the time I was managing a number of bands, and there was a very big block against independent record companies. There was only EMI and Decca at the time. And a particular artist I had was Georgie Fame. And Georgie had this problem that at that time, that he was very much rhythm and bluesy, jazz, black orientated, you know, were his roots. And of course, at that time, it was Cliff Richard and the Shadows and Frank Ifield, and that was the establishment.
Every record starts at the desk of one of the company's artist and recording managers. In this case, Norrie Paramore. Who's he thinking about? Ruby Murray, Craig Douglas, The Shadows, Cliff Richard, Michael Holliday? No, it's Helen Shapiro.
I have loved you more each day, walking back to happiness. Whoop-ah, oh yeah, said goodbye to loneliness. Whoop-ah, oh yeah.
And then we went into independent recording, which was something that didn't happen in those days either. And having done that, I remember taking the acetate along to BBC, who had I think, an hour a week, Alan Freeman on a Saturday afternoon.
Greetings, Pop Pickers. It's Pick of the Pops. Unit 1's the new chart climbers, and for the first time ever at number 19 is America's Norma Taniga.
And then there was a few hours of Luxembourg at night, which was a bit intermittent signal-wise. And if you weren't with Ian Decker, you couldn't get on Luxembourg. And at that moment, I'd said to them, I'd said, well, look, all I wanted to do is to sort of break Georgie Fame, to get him off the ground. And I've had to record the guy, I've had to start a record label, and now it looks like we have to start a radio station. And it literally was that kind of moment.
Let the sun shine in, come on right away.
I first met Ronan O'Reilly in the Kenya Coffee Bar in the King's Road. So, that, you know, I suppose the Kenya was a sort of a hangover from the late 50s, when there was a sort of cosmopolitan King's Road cowboy who were sort of generally known as hustlers. They generally had a mid-Atlantic accent, they generally wore dark glasses, they generally were photographers, or at least possessed a Hasselblad or a Pentax or both. And they'd sit around in the Kenya, you know, sort of watching their cappuccinos go cold and kind of looking at each other and looking out of the window and, you know, wondering what was going to happen. You know, something might happen. And when Ronan came in, he wasn't, everything Chris had told me about being cool, he wasn't, you know. His clothes were awful, and he was very sort of, hello, how are you, what's happening, baby, you know, and he'd sort of look at everybody and say, how's it going, you know, and, you know, it was the most terrible thing you could possibly say. You know, those kind of guys would have a complete nervous breakdown if they were really asked to say how it was going.
Ian was a friend of mine who was kind of a young boy about town, who had a father who had quite rich parents, and his father worked in the City of London and specialized in financing ideas. And so here I have a friend whose father is a specialist in this, in financing ideas, and here I have another friend who has an idea that wants some finance.
That was the other thing that was happening that was a big influence for me anyway. You know, the Irish-American president, you know, after the sort of grey 50s, and this breaking of the mold had happened at the beginning of the 60s. And I think the Kennedy thing was the first big one of those, you know, and there was that whole war baby, you know, all the war babies were on the move, as it were. And they had a certain amount of money, and they wanted something.
I think when Ronan met me in the Kenya, he wanted to know if I really, I mean, genuinely wanted to know if I was going to be the right kind of, you know, if I could dig it and handle it and had soul, you know. Soul was the thing then. Ray Charles. I mean, you'd actually say Ray Charles, baby, Ray Charles. You know, and it was a way of saying something, you know. You'd actually say Ray Charles.
Well, now, oh, Mary Ann, you know you sure look fine. Well, now, oh, you know you sure look fine. Well, now, oh, Mary.
The 60s were a time when you didn't, with sort of specialists didn't seem to be necessary. All sorts of people got together, as is well known, to form a band who, quite separately, weren't very good musicians, and somehow it worked together. And people started record companies who didn't know anything about record companies. Everything could start. Starting Caroline was just another stunt. But it is important to remember that actually it is suddenly as if the sort of slate had been wiped clean, and new ideas were it.